Have you ever wondered where the rules that run our world actually come from? Well, today we're going to break down the big ideas from Henry Kissinger's massive book, World Order, to answer that exact question. So let's jump back in time and find the blueprint for the world we live in right now. So Kissinger kicks things off with this really provocative idea. We talk about a world order all the time, right? But he says, look, a truly global system that everyone agrees on has never, ever existed. So that begs the question. What's the invisible framework that's actually holding everything together and stopping us from descending into total chaos? To get to the bottom of that, we need to go way back, nearly 400 years, to a moment of absolute world-breaking crisis in Europe. This is where our modern concept of order was invented, and believe me, it wasn't some grand philosophical breakthrough. It was born out of pure, raw desperation. I'm talking about the 30 Years' War. And this wasn't just a war. It was an absolute inferno. For a century, religious and political fights had been simmering, and they finally exploded into a conflict so vicious that it wiped out almost a quarter of the people in Central Europe. It was a war where all the old certainties about God, kings, and empires just completely shattered. But what's really wild is the total flip in thinking that came out of this catastrophe. For 1,000 years, the European dream was all about unity, one big Christian society, with the emperor and the pope calling the shots. After the horror of the war, that dream was dead and buried. And in its place came this practical and, frankly, pretty radical new idea. What if the world is just a bunch of different states, all equal, who have to figure out how to get along without fighting over who's right about God? And the absolute bedrock of this new system, which was laid down in 1648 by the Peace of Westphalia, was this one simple but totally game-changing principle: state sovereignty. It basically says, what happens inside your borders, your government, your religion, that's your business, and only your business. The price of peace was for everyone to just agree to stay out of everyone else's backyard. And you can see the result right here on the map. The whole idea of a single, unified empire, gone. Instead, you get this patchwork quilt of independent states. This fragmented, messy, pluralistic Europe is the direct ancestor of the international system we're all still living with today. Okay, so if you don't have an emperor or a pope calling the shots anymore, how do you actually keep the peace, right? How does this thing even work?
Well, the answer was basically a giant, high-stakes game played by the great powers of Europe.
And the number one rule of that game was the balance of power. This became the main goal of pretty much every country's foreign policy. You weren't fighting for God anymore. You were fighting to make sure that no single country got strong enough to become the bully of the whole continent. It was all about keeping things in a delicate equilibrium. And this quote from the British statesman Lord Palmerston just nails the whole mindset of the time. Alliances were completely fluid. Your enemy yesterday could be your best friend tomorrow. The only thing that mattered was your own national interest, and the top interest was always keeping that balance. It was a complete departure from the old world of fixed religious loyalties. Now, a system like this delicate game, it needs a referee, right? Someone to make sure nobody flips the board over. And that role, it fell to Great Britain. Safely separated from the continent by the sea and with a huge navy, Britain could play the role of the balancer. They'd just watch from the sidelines, and anytime one country, say France, started getting a little too big for its britches, Britain would jump in and back the other side to push things back into balance. This Westphalian system, this whole game of balancing states, it actually worked, more or less, for about 150 years. But then, something came along that didn't just challenge the rules. It threatened to smash the whole thing to pieces: the French Revolution. You see, the revolution just turned everything on its head, especially how wars were fought. Before, wars were kind of like these limited chess matches between kings over a piece of territory. But the revolution, that was a whole different beast. This was total war, fought by the entire nation, not for a province, but for an idea. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to overthrow every single king in Europe. So what was the fuel for all this? Well, it was this new idea of the general will. The theory went that the will of the people was this secret, unstoppable force. It couldn't be held back by old laws or traditions or even the borders of other countries. And since the revolutionaries saw themselves as the one true voice of the people, it basically gave them a blank check to do whatever they wanted to spread their revolution. And the one person who became the living, breathing symbol of this world-changing force was, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte. The philosopher Hegel famously saw him and called him the world soul on horseback. To people like Hegel, Napoleon wasn't just another king. He was this historic, unstoppable individual who was going to remake the entire world in his own image and just sweep away that old, dusty system of states. Okay, so after 25 years of revolutionary chaos and war that engulfed the entire continent, Napoleon is finally defeated. In 1815, the leaders of Europe all gather in Vienna with this massive, monumental task. How do we pick up the pieces and build an order that actually lasts? And you gotta remember, everyone showing up to this party wanted something different. Britain just wanted its old balance of power back, Austria was terrified of another revolution, Russia's Czar had this kind of weird, mystical vision of a holy alliance of Christian kings. So the big question was, how in the world do you get all these competing agendas to work together to create something stable? And this is the really brilliant part. This is the key takeaway. The big brains at Vienna figured out that just balancing military power wasn't enough. I mean, that had failed to stop Napoleon. For real, lasting stability, they realized you needed something else, a shared agreement on what makes a government legit. For them, that meant traditional monarchy, power plus legitimacy. You needed both. And to make sure this new system stuck, they built this clever three-part structure to lock it all in place. Think of it like this. You had the Quadruple Alliance, which was basically the muscle ready to enforce the new borders. Then you had the Holy Alliance, which was like the ideological guard dog, protecting kings from revolution. And finally, the Concert of Europe, which was the diplomatic hotline, a way for the big powers to meet up and talk through problems before they exploded into war. So, did it work? What was the result of all this? Well, it was about 100 years of peace. Seriously, for all its flaws, the Vienna system gave Europe its most peaceful century in modern history. There wasn't a single continent-wide war from 1815 all the way up to the disaster of World War I in 1914. I mean, that is an incredible achievement. And that brings us right back to today, and it leaves us with the same critical question Kissinger poses for our own era. When you look at our world with all its new rising powers and totally clashing values, what's our shared foundation? What's going to be the basis for order in our time?